The Duke of Winthorne banished Ilara Fenwick from Blackthorn Hall before 200 tenants, 40 servants, and every noble guest who had gathered beneath the summer pavilion to celebrate the estate's harvest. He did not lower his voice. He did not take her aside. He stood upon the stone terrace in his dark formal coat, while rain gathered beyond the hills, and declared that she had abused his household's trust, forged his authority, and interfered in matters far above her station. Ilara stood below him, with a sealed eviction order still held between her fingers. She wore a plain gray-blue gown that had belonged to her mother, its cuffs carefully repaired, and its hem darkened by mud from the tenant cottages. Around her, music had stopped. Wine glasses remained suspended halfway to startled mouths. Even the children had fallen silent. "You used my seal to cancel lawful notices," the Duke said. "I delayed the removal of 12 families until you had read the petitions placed on your desk. You were not authorized to make that decision. No one else was willing to make it." A faint stir moved through the tenants gathered beyond the terrace steps. Several lowered their heads, not because they believed her guilty, but because gratitude could be dangerous when a duke was angry. Julian Ashcombe, 7th Duke of Winthorne, looked down at Ilara with an expression she had once mistaken for restraint. That afternoon, it appeared more like judgment. He was 34, tall, dark-haired, and composed in the way of men raised to believe that emotion became respectable only when concealed beneath authority. He had returned to Blackthorn Hall 8 months earlier after years abroad, and found an estate burdened by debt, neglected farms, and accounts that seemed determined to contradict one another. Ilara had spent those 8 months placing accurate figures before him. He had spent them deciding whether accuracy was loyalty or defiance. Lord Silas Vane stood at the Duke's right shoulder, elegant in pale summer linen, his silver-headed cane resting against one gloved palm. As Winthorne's cousin and chief estate advisor, Silas possessed the smooth confidence of a man who had never been required to prove the honesty of anything he said. Beside him stood Lady Beatrice Harcourt, the woman half the county expected Julian to marry. Her face was lovely, pale, and perfectly sympathetic. Only Ilara noticed the satisfaction at the corners of her mouth. "The notices were issued under false valuations," Ilara said. "The rents had already been paid." Silas gave a soft laugh, a serious accusation from a household dependent. "The receipts are in the Western Archive. The same archive in which we found letters bearing His Grace's forged signature?" Lady Beatrice asked. Her tone was gentle enough to make cruelty sound like concern. A murmur passed through the guests. Julian's jaw tightened. Earlier that morning, Silas had produced 3 letters sent to local creditors, each promising payments the estate could not afford, and each signed with the Duke's name. The handwriting resembled Ilara's. The paper had come from the correspondence room she supervised. The sealing wax matched the stick in her desk. The letters were convincing because someone had prepared them carefully. "I did not write those letters," Ilara said. "Your hand appears on every page," Silas replied. "An imitation of it." "And the wax?" "Taken from my desk." "The paper?" "Taken from the archive." "The seal?" Julian asked. That was the question he had asked twice in private and once before the household council. Ilara looked at him now. "I do not know." "Only 4 people possess access to the ducal seal." "Then question all 4. 3 have served this family for decades, and I have served it for 11 years. You were never a servant," Lady Beatrice said lightly. "At least, not in any clearly defined sense." Several guests smiled because they feared not doing so. Ilara felt the insult settle exactly where Beatrice intended. Ilara had arrived at Blackthorn Hall at 16 after her mother's death. The late Dowager Duchess had called her a ward, then a companion, then simply Ilara, as if affection could replace legal definition. She had studied in the library, helped in the estate office, taught the village children during winters, and managed the correspondence of 2 elderly duchesses and 1 frequently absent duke. She received a modest allowance but held no formal title. She belonged everywhere in the house and nowhere in its hierarchy. Such positions were comfortable until someone decided they were suspicious. Julian descended 1 terrace step. "You were instructed not to interfere with the northern leases. I was instructed to record them. You stopped the bailiffs. A woman was in labor. You threatened them with dismissal. They threatened to place her bed in the road. You had no authority. Someone required humanity." The tenants shifted again. Mrs. Agnes Henshaw, the gray-haired housekeeper, stood near the pavilion entrance with her hands clasped hard enough to whiten her knuckles. Beside her, old Thomas Reed, the estate's retired solicitor, watched Julian with the mournful concentration of a man witnessing a familiar mistake made by a younger generation. Silas leaned toward the Duke. "This is precisely the difficulty, Julian. Miss Fenwick has begun to mistake long tolerance for ownership." Ilara turned toward him. "You have begun to mistake management for theft." The silence sharpened. Silas's smile remained, but his eyes became cold. Julian looked from Ilara to the watching crowd. Pride often enters a room disguised as the need to restore order. "Enough," he said. "You will leave Blackthorn Hall before sunset." Mrs. Henshaw inhaled sharply. Someone among the tenants whispered Ilara's name. Julian continued before sympathy could become resistance. "You will surrender every key, every account book, and every document belonging to this estate. You are not to enter the house, offices, farms, cottages, or woodland without written permission. You are banishing me from the place where I was raised. I am removing you from property that is not yours." A low rumble of thunder rolled across the distant fields. Ilara looked at him for a long moment. The hurt was there, but she would not offer it to the crowd. Some people wept when humiliated. Others shouted. Ilara had spent too many years being dependent upon other people's mercy to waste emotion where it might be used against her. She reached into the pocket of her gown and removed a heavy iron ring carrying 11 keys. The archive, the schoolroom, the linen rooms, the estate office, the north gate, the old map chamber. She climbed the terrace steps and placed the ring in Julian's open hand. One smaller object remained against her palm, a narrow brass key worn smooth with age. It had belonged to her mother and opened nothing Ilara had ever found. Julian glanced at it. "All the keys. This one is mine. What does it open?" "My mother never told me." Silas smiled. "Convenient." Ilara closed her fingers around it. "Most things you do not understand appear convenient to you." Julian's expression hardened. "You will leave by 6. "I understand." "Do you?" Lady Beatrice asked. "Because returning after an explicit order would be trespass." Ilara looked toward the long black stone facade of Blackthorn Hall. Its windows reflected the gathering storm. She had polished its silver as a girl, catalogued its books as a young woman, and spent winter nights beside dying tenants because the estate physician refused to cross flooded roads. She knew which staircase groaned, which chimney smoked, which orchard tree produced sour fruit, and which portraits concealed cracks in the plaster. Yet knowledge was not ownership. Love was not ownership. Service was not ownership. At least that was what everyone on the terrace believed. "You are correct, Your Grace," she said. "I have no wish to trespass." She turned, then paused. "But houses have long memories. I hope this one remembers more accurately than you do." She walked through the silent crowd without looking back. The first drops of rain began before she reached the edge of the lawn. By the time she crossed the north gate, the storm had erased her footprints. Julian remained on the terrace with her keys in his hand. Silas began speaking about preserving dignity. Lady Beatrice instructed the musicians to continue. The guests returned slowly to their wine. Only Thomas Reed watched the road where Alara had disappeared. "Your Grace," the old solicitor said quietly, "you have just made a very expensive mistake." Julian turned. "If you have evidence of her innocence, present it." "I was not speaking about innocence." Thomas looked toward the house. "I was speaking about ownership." Julian slept badly that night, though he blamed the thunder. Blackthorn Hall had always changed during storms. Corridors seemed longer. Doors moved in their frames. Wind spoke through unused chimneys in the language of distant footsteps. Shortly after midnight, Julian entered the estate office and found Alara's chair empty. Her absence altered the room more than he expected. The inkpots were sealed. The account books were arranged by year. A list of urgent matters waited beneath a brass paperweight. Repairs to the eastern cottages, medicine for the Miller child, grain deliveries delayed at the river, 3 tenant disputes, 1 missing mare, and a note reminding the Duke that old Mr. Bell could not read and therefore required notices to be explained aloud. Even dismissed, Alara had left order behind her. Julian set down his candle. On the desk lay copies of the forged creditor letters. Silas had discovered them in a locked correspondence drawer. Their handwriting resembled Alara's, but Julian had read enough of her real writing to notice something he had overlooked before. Alara formed the capital W in Winthorn with 2 sharp points. The forged letters used 3. It was a small distinction. Too small to establish innocence, large enough to disturb certainty. Julian opened the drawer where her sealing wax had been found. The lock was unmarked. No scratches. No splintered wood. Whoever took the wax either possessed a key or had never needed one. He heard the door behind him. Lady Beatrice entered carrying a silver candlestick, her cream dressing robe embroidered with flowers. "You should be sleeping," she said. "So should you." "I saw the light." She approached the desk and glanced at the papers. "You are reconsidering." "I am examining. Alara has always had that effect on you." "What effect?" "She makes your decisions feel unkind merely because she dislikes them. Kindness has nothing to do with forged letters." "No, but attachment may." Julian looked at her. "Attachment?" Beatrice smiled with soft sadness. "Everyone has noticed. Julian, there is nothing to notice. You listened to her more than your advisors. You permitted her to contradict you before servants. You sought her opinion about the estate as though she were your equal. She understands the estate, because she has spent years inserting herself into every part of it." Beatrice touched the forged letter. "Do not let guilt become evidence, and do not let dislike become proof." Her expression changed, then smoothed. "I do not dislike her. I pity her." Julian had heard many people use pity as a clean glove for contempt. He closed the drawer. "Silas said he discovered these at 8 yesterday morning." "Yes." "How do you know the time?" "He told us at breakfast." Breakfast was at 9. Beatrice's fingers tightened around the candlestick. Then I assumed. You said 8. Must every word become an inquiry? When a woman has been expelled because of those papers, yes. She stepped back. Be careful, Julian. Suspicion can become a habit. You may find yourself without anyone you trust. Trust should survive questions. Not always. She left, the light of her candle retreating down the corridor. Julian remained in the office until dawn. At 6, Thomas Reed arrived carrying an old leather case and wearing a coat that smelled of rain and tobacco. He had served Julian's grandfather, father, and grandmother, though poor health had forced him into retirement 3 years earlier. His back was bent, but his mind remained cruelly straight. "Where is Miss Fenwick?" he asked. "She left." "Where?" "I do not know." Thomas stared at him. "You sent a woman into a storm without arranging shelter?" "She refused the carriage." "Naturally. Pride is sometimes the only luggage people permit the poor to keep." Julian's face tightened. "You mentioned ownership." "I did." "Explain." Thomas placed the leather case on the desk, but did not open it. "When is Miss Fenwick's birthday?" "October." "The date?" "The 19th. "You do not know." "Why should I?" "Because your grandmother did." Julian leaned against the desk. "Speak plainly." "Plain truths are often expensive. You said that already. And you remain unprepared to pay." Thomas removed his spectacles, polished them, then replaced them with deliberate care. 29 years ago, your father nearly lost Blackthorn." Julian laughed once, without humor. "My father never mentioned financial trouble. Your father rarely mentioned facts that diminished him." Thomas opened the case and removed a faded memorandum. After a series of failed investments, he owed more than the estate could produce. The banks refused further credit. The northern farms were already promised as security. Blackthorn would have been divided and sold. Julian looked at the paper, but did not touch it. It was not. Because someone provided the funds. My grandfather? No. Then who? Thomas looked toward Alara's empty chair. Margaret Fenwick. Julian stared at him. Margaret had been Alara's mother, a quiet woman he remembered from childhood as the companion who knew every plant in the gardens and every tenant by name. She had died when Julian was 19. He remembered black ribbons, his grandmother's grief, and Alara standing beside the grave without an umbrella. Margaret possessed no fortune. Her father owned 3 shipping warehouses in Bristol. She inherited privately through her mother. She invested nearly everything in Blackthorn. Why? Because your father offered security in land. Thomas unfolded a copy of an agreement. 1/2 beneficial ownership of the house, farms, woods, mineral rights, rents, and future improvements. Julian read the first page twice. His father's signature appeared at the bottom, Margaret Fenwick's beside it. This is not a deed. It is the preliminary settlement. Where is the executed document? That is the difficulty. Meaning, the original was removed from my office 27 years ago. Julian looked up sharply. By whom? Your father claimed it had been destroyed before registration. Margaret produced a second sealed copy. That disappeared after her death. Then the agreement is unenforceable. Perhaps. You said Alara owned half. I said your banishment was expensive. Thomas removed another envelope. Your grandmother believed Margaret's copy remained hidden somewhere at Blackthorn. She also believed Margaret had given Alara the means to find it. Julian thought of the small brass key. Why did no one tell me? Your grandmother intended to do so when you assumed management of the estate. Then you left England. When you returned, she was dead, and Lord Silas had taken control of the accounts. Are you accusing Silas? I am describing sequence. Accusation requires evidence. Julian walked to the window. Morning light spread across the rain-washed lawns. Somewhere beyond those lawns, Alara believed she had been cast out from the only home she knew. Did Alara know? I do not believe so. Why would her mother conceal such a thing? Because ownership is not protection when the more powerful owner controls the house, the courts, and the story. Thomas's voice softened. Margaret tried to expose financial misconduct by your father's advisor. Within weeks, she became ill. Her papers vanished. She died before she could bring a claim. Which advisor? Thomas looked at him. Silas's father. Julian turned slowly. Silas was barely 20, old enough to understand where his family's security came from. This is speculation. Yes. Thomas closed the case. Find Miss Fenwick, ask about the key, and before you approach her, decide whether you seek justice or merely wish to preserve Blackthorn. They are not opposites. They may become so. Alara had found shelter at an abandoned dower cottage beyond the southern boundary, a small stone house that technically belonged to the parish rather than the estate. Its roof leaked in 3 places, the chimney smoked, and the front door had swollen shut until the village blacksmith forced it open. Mrs. Henshaw had sent blankets through a kitchen maid. The tenants brought bread, milk, candles, and more gratitude than Alara knew how to receive. She refused money. She accepted tools. By the second morning, she had repaired one shutter and begun cleaning the hearth. Work gave fear somewhere to go. At noon, Mary Bell arrived carrying her feverish 6-year-old son. The doctor will not come, Mary said. He says we still owe for winter. Alara touched the child's forehead. How long has he been this hot? Since last night. Bring him inside. She cooled him with damp cloths, prepared willow bark tea, and sent the blacksmith's boy to fetch Mrs. Henshaw's medicinal chest. The Duke's order forbade Alara from entering the estate. It did not forbid the estate from finding her. By evening, 3 more tenants had come with notices they could not understand. Each document ordered payment of arrears already settled. Alara compared the dates. All had been issued within the last month. All carried Silas's authorization. All directed payment to a temporary collection office in the market town rather than the estate bank. Did you pay there? She asked Mr. Bell. Twice. Did you receive receipts? He produced 2 narrow slips. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the ink bore the faint purple tint used by the estate's private clerk. Alara spread the papers across the cottage table. The forged letters had not been created merely to accuse her. They were part of a larger false account showing obligations, payments, and debts that did not exist. Someone was making Blackthorn appear poorer while collecting rents outside the official books. The question was not whether money had been stolen. The question was how long. That night, Alara examined her mother's brass key. It was narrow, delicate, and cut in an unusual double pattern. A tiny design had been engraved near the bow, half of a thorn branch beneath a star. Alara had seen the image before, not on a door. On one of the old estate maps stored in the northern map chamber. The maps belonged to the earliest structure at Blackthorn. before later dukes added wings, galleries, and ornamental towers. Her mother used to take Alara there as a child and show her how boundaries changed when rivers moved. "Land remembers promises," Margaret once said. Alara had thought it one of her mother's gentle peculiarities. Now she wondered whether it had been instruction. She could not enter the estate. Lady Beatrice had made certain to describe such a return as trespass. Alara might possess evidence that tenants were being robbed, but without documents from the archive she could prove nothing. She sat beside the cottage fire listening to rain against the roof. Near midnight, someone knocked. Alara picked up the iron poker before approaching the door. "Who is it?" A man displaying the good judgment to stand beneath a leaking gutter rather than enter without permission. "Julian." She opened the door, but did not lower the poker. The Duke stood in the rain wearing a dark cloak, his hair wet at the temples. No carriage waited behind him. He had come on horseback and left the horse near the lane. "You are forbidden from this estate," Alara said. "The cottage belongs to the parish." "Then I appear to be trespassing." "How unfortunate. May I come in?" She looked beyond him to ensure he was alone. "Why?" "Because Thomas Reed told me something I should have known years ago." "That narrows nothing. Your mother invested in Blackthorn." Alara's grip loosened on the poker. "What?" "He believes she received half ownership in exchange." The storm seemed to move farther away, as if the entire world had paused to hear the answer. "Half? The house, land, rents, woods, and mineral rights. That is impossible." "There was an agreement. The final deed disappeared." Alara stared at him. "And you came to tell me I might possess half the property from which you expelled me." Shame moved across his face. "Yes. That is almost funny. I have not found it amusing. You would, if you were standing where I am." "I do not expect forgiveness." "Good. I came to ask about your key." She closed her hand around it. "You demanded it yesterday." "I was wrong." "That sentence must be painful for a duke." "Less painful than what I did." She studied him. The arrogance from the terrace was gone, but regret alone did not deserve trust. Regret was an emotion. Restitution required action. "My mother gave me the key before she died," Alara said. "She told me not to surrender it to anyone, no matter how kind they appeared or how powerful they became." Sensible advice. "You are not having it." "I am not asking for it." "Then what are you asking?" "To help you discover what it opens." "Why?" "Because if half of Blackthorn belongs to you, I have occupied and controlled your property without your consent." "Your father did first." Julian lowered his eyes. "Yes." Alara had expected denial. His acceptance unsettled her more. "Thomas believes the key may lead to your mother's deed," he continued. "I believe someone created the forged letters to remove you before you could discover it." Silas. "Perhaps. You still defend him." "I am attempting not to condemn another person before evidence. A lesson learned with remarkable speed after my departure." He absorbed the blow without answering. The child sleeping beneath the fire began to cough. Julian glanced toward him. "Who is that?" "Daniel Bell." "Why is he here?" "Because the estate physician refused treatment over an unpaid account." Julian's expression darkened. "I pay Dr. Weller an annual retainer." "Then you have purchased a very expensive refusal." The Duke removed his wet cloak. "What does the boy need?" "Medicine, broth, and warmth." Julian placed a purse on the table. Alara pushed it back. His family does not require charity. They paid rent twice because your temporary collection office demanded it. There is no temporary collection office. There is in the market town. She showed him the receipts. Julian read them in silence. These are not entered in the main accounts. No. Silas supervised rent collection. Yes. Why did no one complain? They did. I placed the petitions on your desk. Julian looked toward the fire. Silas told me they requested rent reductions. And you believed him? I believed the advisor my family had trusted for 20 years. You believed the person whose voice resembled authority. I was wrong. Again? More often than I would prefer. Daniel stirred. Ilara adjusted the blanket. Julian watched her cool the boy's forehead and lift the cup carefully to his lips. There was nothing theatrical in her kindness. She did not glance toward the Duke to ensure he noticed. She did not speak about sacrifice. She merely did what was needed because a child was ill. Julian had seen grand gestures performed in ballrooms by people who later dismissed hungry servants for stealing bread. Ilara's goodness existed most clearly when no reward was possible. The physician will come, he said. Not if you command him for this one evening. He must treat every tenant included in his contract. I will alter the contract. And the rent records? Audited. By Silas? No. By whom? You. Ilara looked at him. You banished me yesterday. I am asking you to return. As what? Estate auditor. Under your authority? Joint authority until ownership is resolved. That is convenient for you. It may save Blackthorn. There it is. She stood. You did not come because I was wronged. You came because the house may be threatened. Both are true. But only one brought you through the rain. Julian's silence answered. Ilara opened the door. You should leave. The forged letters will still exist tomorrow. Silas may destroy records. Then guard your archive. The key may open something there. And you have forbidden me from entering. I revoke the order. You cannot restore dignity as easily as access. Julian stood in the doorway. Rain moved behind him like a curtain. What would you have me do? Begin by understanding that the question is not yours to ask. You decided my guilt publicly. You decided my punishment publicly. Now you wish to negotiate privately because the consequences embarrass you. That is not. Return when you are prepared to tell the truth before the same people who heard the lie. She closed the door. Julian remained outside for several seconds. Then his footsteps crossed the wet stones. Ilara leaned against the wood, trembling harder than she had on the terrace. Anger had kept her upright. Hope was more dangerous. The next morning, the bell at Blackthorn Hall rang 11 times, calling every servant, tenant representative, guest, and estate officer into the great hall. Julian stood beneath the portrait of his father. Silas arrived smiling, as if expecting a disciplinary announcement. Lady Beatrice sat beside her widowed mother. Mrs. Henshaw remained near the servants. Thomas Reed held his leather case. Ilara entered last. She had agreed to come only after Julian sent a written statement revoking her banishment and acknowledging that the accusations against her remained unproven. The entire hall turned toward her. Yesterday, the crowd had watched her leave. Today, it watched her return. Julian stepped forward. Miss Fenwick was dismissed from Blackthorn before a full examination of the evidence against her. That decision was unjust. Lady Beatrice stiffened. Silas's smile faded. Julian continued. The letters attributed to Miss Fenwick contain inconsistencies. The seal was accessible to more people than this household was led to believe. Rent payments have been diverted through an unauthorized collection office, and tenant petitions were concealed from me. A murmur rose. Until the inquiry is completed, Miss Fenwick will have unrestricted access to the estate records and will conduct an independent audit alongside Mr. Reed. No person, including myself, may remove, alter, or destroy documents without their approval. Silas stepped forward. Julian, this spectacle is unwise. So was banishing an innocent woman. You do not know that she is innocent. Neither did I know she was guilty. Julian looked toward Alara. Yet I punished her as though doubt belonged only to the powerless. The room became still. Public apologies are rare among powerful men because humility costs more when witnessed. Alara saw the effort in his face. She did not mistake it for repayment. But it was a beginning. There is another matter, Julian said. Thomas Reed opened his case and produced the old agreement. Evidence suggests that Margaret Fenwick invested the funds that prevented Blackthorn from being sold 29 years ago. In exchange, she received a beneficial interest amounting to half of this estate. Gasps moved through the hall. Lady Beatrice whispered something to her mother. Silas went pale before quickly recovering. An absurd claim, he said. The document was never registered. The executed deed may still exist, Thomas replied, and Miss Fenwick may be its lawful heir. Every face turned toward Alara again, but the quality of attention had changed. Yesterday, she had been a dependent suspected of reaching above herself. Today, the possibility of ownership placed weight behind her silence. The transformation disgusted her. She had not become more intelligent overnight. She had not become kinder, braver, or more honest. Only the crowd's estimate of her power had changed. The audit begins immediately, Alara said. Any tenant holding a disputed notice or receipt should bring it to the estate office. No family will be removed while the accounts remain uncertain. Silas laughed. You speak as though the estate is already yours. Alara looked at him. You spoke as though it were yours while stealing from it. Laughter began among several younger tenants, then stopped when Silas turned. Alara remembered the terrace. Laughter had once helped humiliate her. Now it exposed how quickly fear changed sides. You accuse me without evidence, Silas said. I learned from excellent company. Julian's face tightened, not at her challenge but at the truth beneath it. Mr. Vane, he said, you will surrender your office keys. You cannot be serious. All of them. Silas looked around the hall as though expecting support. Lady Beatrice studied her gloves. Several guests avoided his eyes. At last, he removed the silver keyring from his waistcoat and placed it in Julian's hand. Alara recognized one small key among them. It matched the correspondence drawer. The audit revealed theft by inches, a duplicated rent here, a false repair there. Grain recorded as spoiled but sold privately. Timber marked unsuitable and transferred to a company owned by Silas's brother-in-law. No single entry could have ruined Blackthorn. Together, they formed a slow bleeding disguised as bad fortune. Alara and Thomas worked from dawn until the lamps burned low. Julian attended every session, though she assigned him no authority beyond producing documents when asked. He accepted the position with surprising patience. On the third evening, Alara found him asleep in the estate office with his head resting against the chair and an account book open across his chest. He had removed his coat. Ink marked his white sleeve. A cup of untouched coffee had gone cold beside him. She considered waking him, then placed a folded shawl over his shoulders. It was a small kindness. She disliked that it came naturally. Julian woke as she turned away. "You covered me. The room is cold. You might have allowed me to freeze. That would complicate the audit." He smiled faintly. "Naturally." She returned to the ledger. These invoices use the same 3 suppliers, but the addresses do not exist. False companies? Likely. The payments leave the estate bank and disappear through an account in York. Julian moved beside her. "Harcourt Mercantile." Alara looked up. Lady Beatrice's father owned Harcourt Mercantile. "Did you know?" she asked. "No." "Were you planning to marry her?" "Others were planning it for me." "That is not an answer." "I had considered it." Alara's pen paused. "Because you loved her?" "Because Blackthorn required capital, and her father offered favorable terms. A romantic foundation. I did not believe marriage required romance." "What did you believe it required?" "Duty, compatibility, an absence of mutual disgust." "Your standards are inspiring." He gave a quiet laugh. Alara looked at him despite herself. The laugh changed him, as it always had. Julian was handsome when composed. He was human when amused. "And you?" he asked. "What do you believe marriage requires?" "Choice." "Only choice?" "Respect, safety, the ability to speak without calculating the punishment." His humor faded. "You could not do that with me." "Not on the terrace." "Before it?" Alara looked down at the accounts. "Sometimes." "And now?" "Now you are assisting with an audit that may prove half your inheritance belongs to the woman you expelled. I do not yet know whether that is humility or survival. Perhaps both. At least you are becoming honest." "Under strict supervision." Their eyes met. Something quiet moved between them, built not from beauty or rescue, but from the dangerous relief of being understood. Alara broke the gaze first. "We must inspect the map chamber." "The key?" "My mother engraved the same half-thorn symbol found on the original Northern Survey." They entered the chamber shortly before midnight. Dust lay across enormous rolled maps and brass instruments. A carved oak table stood in the center, its surface inlaid with the complete crest of Blackthorn. 2 thorn branches beneath a 7-pointed star. Alara placed her brass key beside the left branch. The shape matched a narrow opening hidden within the carving. She inserted it. Nothing happened. Julian examined the opposite branch. "There should be a second key. My mother gave me only one. Perhaps my family kept the other." They searched cabinets, boxes, and old desk drawers. At last, Julian removed the iron key ring Alara had surrendered during her banishment. One key was smaller than the rest, dark with age and engraved with the other half of the star. "Where did this come from?" Alara asked. "It has always been on the household ring," meaning the compartment required both families. Or both owners. They inserted the keys simultaneously. A hidden drawer released beneath the table. Inside lay an oilcloth packet, a sealed letter, and a silver surveyor's compass engraved with the initials M.F. The packet contained the executed deed. Margaret Fenwick's ownership of one undivided half of Blackthorn Hall and its estate had been signed, witnessed, sealed, and registered through a private trust in Scotland. Attached was a later document naming Alara as sole heir. Julian read the pages slowly. "It is valid." Alara touched her mother's signature. Her hands began to shake. For 11 years, She had accepted allowance as charity from a house partly sustained by her own inheritance. She had asked permission to use rooms she owned. She had thanked people for shelter beneath her own roof. Her mother had died carrying a truth powerful enough to change both their lives. "Why did she never tell me?" Ilara whispered. Julian opened the sealed letter. "It is addressed to you." She took it, but could not break the wax. "Read it," he said gently. "I cannot." "Then wait." "If I wait, I may invent kinder reasons than she had." Ilara opened the letter. Her mother's writing filled 4 pages. "My dearest Ilara, if you are reading this, then Blackthorn has either remembered its promise or broken it entirely. I pray it is the former. I concealed the deed because men who had already stolen money were prepared to steal your future, and because the law protects paper only when powerful people agree to respect it. The old Duke promised public recognition, but fear and pride delayed him until delay became betrayal. The Dowager knows enough to watch over you, though not enough to protect you from every consequence. The 2 keys were separated so that neither family could claim the estate without facing the other. Ownership is not merely the right to possess. It is the obligation to care for what cannot defend itself. If Blackthorn becomes yours, do not love the house more than the people who make it alive, and do not surrender your voice merely because someone finally offers you a place at the table. It was always partly your table. Ilara finished reading in silence. Julian stood opposite her, his face shadowed by the single lamp. "My family stole your life," he said. "Your father did. And I repeated him. You did not know. I knew enough to question you. I chose not to." He removed the ducal signet ring from his finger and placed it beside the deed. "Half of Blackthorn is yours. I will instruct the solicitors to recognize the claim immediately." "Without contest?" "Yes. Your creditors may object. They may object to the portion that remains mine. You could challenge the document for years." "I could." "Why will you not?" "Because it is yours." The simplicity of the answer hurt more than argument. Ilara had spent so much of her life expecting resistance that justice felt almost suspicious. "This does not absolve you," she said. "I know. I have not forgiven you." "I know. You may lose the estate. Half of it was never mine to lose." A sound came from the corridor. The handle moved. Julian extinguished the lamp. The door opened a fraction. A figure entered carrying a shuttered candle and moved directly toward the hidden drawer. Julian seized him. The man struggled, striking Julian across the temple with a metal object before escaping into the passage. Ilara relit the lamp. Blood darkened Julian's hair near his left brow. "Sit down." He took something. The deed remained, but the silver compass was gone. Footsteps vanished down the service stair. Ilara pressed a handkerchief against Julian's wound. "You are bleeding." An observation worthy of an estate owner. "Be quiet." "An order?" "Joint authority." Despite the pain, he smiled. She held the cloth against his temple, while the house awakened around them. It was the first time she had touched him, without necessity created by work, though necessity had now arrived in blood. "Why steal the compass?" Julian asked. "Perhaps it contains something, or identifies something." The stolen compass reappeared the following morning inside Silas's abandoned office. Its glass had been broken and the needle removed. Silas himself was gone. His horse was missing. So were several account books and Lady Beatrice. Her mother claimed Beatrice had retired early and knew nothing of her departure. By noon, a letter arrived from Harcourt Mercantile announcing that the estate's debts had been purchased by a private consortium. Immediate repayment was demanded. If payment failed, the creditors intended to seize the Duke's remaining half and challenge Alara's deed as fraudulent. They planned this, Thomas said. Silas made the estate appear insolvent, then arranged for Harcourt to purchase the debt cheaply. If I had remained banished, Alara said, they could have challenged the trust without opposition. And acquired the mineral rights, Julian added. A new railway survey had recently revealed coal beneath the northern hills. The rights were worth more than the farms, perhaps more than the house itself. Silas had not been stealing only rents. He had been positioning the estate for collapse. The compass needle, Alara said. My mother used survey instruments. Perhaps the needle carried a marker indicating the original mineral boundary. Thomas nodded. The deed grants Margaret's trust 1/2 of all mineral rights, but the division refers to an attached survey. Which is missing, Julian said. Without it, Harcourt will argue that the coal lies entirely within my portion, then seize it through debt. Where would Silas take the needle? Alara asked. Mrs. Henshaw, who had entered carrying tea no one intended to drink, set down the tray. The old mine office. Everyone looked at her. Silas's father used it after the northern shaft closed. He visited often with Miss Fenwick's mother. Why did you never mention this? Julian asked. Mrs. Henshaw's eyes became hard. Because your father dismissed 2 servants for mentioning Margaret's business. Because questions about ownership led to threats. Because silence kept Alara inside this house after her mother died. Silence also kept her ignorant. Yes. Mrs. Henshaw looked at Alara. And that is a debt I have carried every day. She removed a folded note from her apron. Your mother gave me this before she died. She said to keep it until the house opened the hidden drawer. Alara unfolded it. The message contained only one sentence. When the false north points west, follow the stream beneath the earth. Julian studied the broken compass. A false north. The needle may have been magnetized to point toward a location, Alara said. The underground stream passes beneath the old mine office. They rode north before sunset with Thomas, 2 trusted tenants, and a magistrate summoned from the market town. Julian insisted Alara remain behind. Alara reminded him that half the land belonged to her. He did not repeat the suggestion. The mine office stood among overgrown trees beside the sealed entrance to the old shaft. Its windows were broken. Inside, floorboards had been lifted near a rusted iron stove. A narrow stone stair descended beneath the building. The air below smelled of damp earth, oil, and coal. They followed the sound of running water until the passage opened into an underground survey room. Maps covered the walls. Crates contained ledgers, forged seals, tenant receipts, and correspondence between Silas and Lord Harcourt. Lady Beatrice stood beside a table holding the compass needle over an old survey map. Silas aimed a pistol at the doorway. How considerate of you to bring the deed's claimant, he said. Alara looked at Beatrice. You helped forge the letters. I copied your hand, Beatrice replied. You left examples everywhere. And the seal? Julian wears sentiment like armor. I only had to ask to see his father's ring once. Julian's face hardened. You made an impression. During the spring ball, you were distracted. By what? Beatrice glanced at Alara. By her. The admission carried more bitterness than affection ever could. Silas motioned with the pistol. Place the deed on the table. We did not bring it, Julian said. Then Miss Fenwick becomes unnecessary. You will not harm her. There it is, Chauncey, Silas said. The weakness everyone saw except you. Respect is not weakness. No, but love is famously expensive. Alara felt Julian's reaction, though she did not look at him. Silas smiled. You thought your attachment invisible? Beatrice understood it before you did. She knew marriage would never secure Blackthorn, while the little archivist remained in the house. So you framed me, Alara said. We gave Julian the evidence he already wished to believe. That is the beauty of pride. It performs half the crime itself. Julian absorbed the words without defense. Alara stepped toward the table. The map you need is incomplete. Silas's eyes narrowed. The compass needle completes it. No. My mother separated the mineral survey into 3 parts. The compass indicates only direction. This was a guess. Silas glanced at Beatrice. That glance confirmed uncertainty. Alara continued. The second part is in the hidden drawer. You are lying. Then you have no reason to keep us alive. Silas raised the pistol. Julian moved slightly in front of her. Do not, Alara whispered. For once, allow protection without interpreting it as possession. For once, do not make decisions for me. Even beneath threat, the argument was familiar enough to sound almost intimate. Beatrice laughed. How touching. You will quarrel beautifully while losing everything. What do you receive? Alara asked her. Marriage? Beatrice's expression changed. Alara turned to Silas. Did you promise her Julian would be forced to marry her after Harcourt acquired the debt? Silas said nothing. You promised her Blackthorn, Alara continued. But if the creditors seize Julian's half and invalidate mine, the estate belongs to her father, not to her, not to you. Beatrice looked at Silas. He said the northern rights would be placed in my name. Did he show you documents? Of course. Signed? Silence. Silas's voice hardened. Do not listen to her. That is what people say when listening becomes dangerous, Alara replied. The stream moved beneath the stones. Water had begun entering the lower passage after days of rain. Julian noticed the rising level. So did Silas. The map, Silas demanded. Give me the true location. Lower the pistol, Alara said. You have no authority here. Half of this mine belongs to me. Paper does not stop a bullet. No. But arrogance often places the person holding the weapon in the wrong position. Silas frowned. Alara looked toward the cracked support beam behind him. Coal mines depended upon weight, water, and old wood. Her mother had taught her to read ground the way others read faces. The beam carried fresh cuts near its base. Silas had weakened it, perhaps intending to collapse the room after removing the records. Water now washed around the cut. The ceiling is failing, Alara said. Silas glanced upward. Julian lunged. The pistol fired into the stone wall. Beatrice screamed. Thomas and the tenants moved forward. Silas struck Julian and reached for the compass needle. The weakened beam split. Stones fell from the roof, blocking the passage behind them. Water surged across the floor. The eastern tunnel, Alara shouted. It follows the underground stream. Silas ran first, carrying the needle and one bundle of documents. Beatrice followed. Julian caught Alara's hand as the room filled with dust. They entered the tunnel while Thomas and the others dragged the magistrate through the narrowing gap. The water reached Alara's knees, then her waist. Darkness swallowed the group when the last candle went out. Keep your left hand on the wall, Alara called. The tunnel curves toward the stream outlet. How do you know? Julian asked. My mother's maps. You remember them? I remember everything people assumed did not matter. Behind them, another collapse thundered. Beatrice cried out ahead. They found her clinging to a ledge where the tunnel divided. Silas had abandoned her. Which way? Julian asked. Ilara listened. Water moved faster through the right passage. Air touched her face from the left. Left. Silas went right, Beatrice said. Then Silas chose the water. They followed the air and emerged through a stone drainage arch beneath the northern stream. Rain fell above them. Thomas, the magistrate, the tenants, and Beatrice crawled out one after another. Silas did not appear. Hours later, constables found him farther downstream, alive but injured, clinging to a fallen tree. The stolen documents remained trapped inside his coat. The compass needle had washed away. It no longer mattered. The papers proved the entire scheme. Harcourt Mercantile had funded the false collection office. Silas had diverted rent, fabricated estate debts, forged Julian's correspondence, and planned to invalidate Ilara's ownership after forcing her removal. Lady Beatrice had created the forged handwriting and stolen an impression of the ducal seal. Her cooperation after the mine collapse reduced the charges against her, though society's affection disappeared more quickly than legal consequences arrived. Her father fled to France and was later returned to face fraud proceedings. Silas went to prison. The public reckoning occurred 1 month later in the same summer pavilion where Ilara had been banished. This time no musicians played. Tenants, servants, creditors, solicitors, magistrates, and neighboring landowners gathered beneath a clear autumn sky. 2 chairs stood upon the terrace. One carried the ducal crest. The other bore the half-thorn and star engraved upon Ilara's key. Julian remained standing. Thomas Reed read the trust deed aloud. He described Margaret Fenwick's investment, the late Duke's concealment, the separated keys, and Ilara's inheritance. When he finished, the magistrate confirmed that Ilara Fenwick held legal title to one undivided half of Blackthorn Hall and its entire estate. No one laughed. No one whispered. Even the wind seemed to wait. Julian stepped to the terrace edge. Several weeks ago, I stood here and told Miss Fenwick that she had no claim to this place. Ilara looked at him. He wore no ducal sash, no ceremonial sword, no symbol except the signet ring he had once placed beside her mother's deed. I said those words because I believed ownership gave me authority over truth. I believed rank made my suspicion more credible than her character. I believed removing her would restore order. His voice carried across the lawn. I was wrong in every respect. Among the tenants, Mary Bell held Daniel's hand. Mrs. Henshaw stood beside them. Miss Fenwick possessed a legal claim before I ever understood my own, Julian continued. She also possessed a moral claim earned through years of service, care, and courage. I benefited from both while recognizing neither. He turned toward Ilara. I cannot restore the years taken from you or the dignity I damaged. I can acknowledge the truth before every person who witnessed the lie. He removed the ducal signet ring. A murmur moved through the nobles. Julian placed it on the empty chair carrying his crest. Until Miss Fenwick and I agree upon a lawful division or partnership, every significant decision concerning Blackthorn will require both our consent. The northern evictions are cancelled. All duplicate rents will be repaid. The physician's contract will include every estate family without private fees. The mineral rights will not be sold without tenant protections and independent review. Ilara stepped forward. And the estate accounts will be published annually to the tenant council. Several landowners looked horrified. Julian looked at her. Agreed. The village school will receive permanent funding from the Mineral Trust. Agreed. No advisor will hold unchecked control over rents, leases, and banking. Agreed. Ilara glanced toward the crowd. Then I accept joint administration. Applause began among the tenants. It spread to the servants, then the village families, and only afterward to the guests of rank. Julian did not smile as though he had won. He looked relieved that she had not chosen to destroy what remained. That mattered. The audit continued through winter. Ilara moved from the dower cottage into the western apartments at Blackthorn, not because Julian invited her, but because they were located within her half of the oldest structure. She hung her mother's portrait in the map chamber and placed the 2 brass keys beneath it. Julian moved his office to a smaller room in the eastern wing after Ilara claimed the traditional ducal study for the Joint Estate Council. When Mrs. Henshaw asked whether the arrangement troubled him, he replied that discomfort was an inexpensive form of education. He learned to ask before entering Ilara's office. He learned that tenants could understand budgets when numbers were explained without contempt. He learned that repairing cottages cost less than repeatedly punishing families for illness. Ilara learned that Julian's pride, though dangerous, was not his deepest quality. Beneath it lived a capacity for correction that required pain to awaken, but did not disappear when attention moved elsewhere. He visited injured miners without reporters. He sold 2 London houses to repay tenant rents. He dismissed Dr. Weller and hired a young physician required to treat the poorest family before accepting private patients. He wrote letters clearing Margaret Fenwick's name and signed each one personally. None of this earned forgiveness automatically. That was precisely why it began to matter. In January, Ilara found Julian repairing a broken shelf inside the village school. His coat lay across a desk. Sawdust covered his sleeves. "There are carpenters," she said. "They are repairing the Bell cottage. You could wait. The children cannot reach the geography books." A crisis. Civilization was hours from collapse. She held the shelf steady while he fixed the bracket. Their shoulders touched. Neither moved away. "London has offered to purchase the coal rights," Julian said. "I know. The amount would clear every debt and replace fields with pits. Not if extraction is limited. Companies promise limitation until profit encounters it. Then we operate the mine ourselves." Ilara looked at him. "You wish to become a coal merchant?" "I wish to prevent another family from controlling Blackthorn through money." "That sounds dangerously sensible. Your influence has damaged me. Perhaps permanently." He smiled. Silence settled between them, warmer than the small iron stove. "Ilara," he said, "there is something I should tell you." That sentence rarely improves an afternoon. "I love you." The directness removed every defense she had prepared. He did not step closer. He did not reach for her. "I have loved you in ways that were selfish, silent, and cowardly," he continued. "Before your banishment, I called it reliance because love would have required recognizing your power over me. When I listened to Silas, part of me believed removing you would restore the distance I understood." Ilara's throat tightened. "You punished me because you feared needing me." "Yes. That is not romantic. No, it is shameful." "Why tell me now?" "Because silence once allowed me to make choices for both of us. I will not repeat it." He looked toward the school windows. Snow moved across the fields. "You owe me nothing. Not affection, not forgiveness, not a future. But you deserve the truth. Ilara studied him. The Duke who had banished her had believed authority protected him from error. The man before her had learned that truth sometimes required standing without protection. "I do not know whether I love you," she said. Pain passed across his face, but he nodded. "I understand." "I know I once did." He looked back at her. "Before the terrace? Before you returned from abroad? Before you began treating every conversation as a battle for control?" That was a particularly poor courtship. It was not a courtship. That explains the results. She almost laughed. "I cannot choose you while wondering whether love will become another form of dependence. Then do not choose me now." You say that very easily. Nothing about it is easy. What will you do? Continue becoming a man you might choose freely. Ilara looked at the repaired shelf. The bracket is crooked. Cruelty after confession is unbecoming. Accuracy is not cruelty. I have heard that somewhere. Spring returned to Blackthorn slowly. Tenant debts were recalculated. The estate council opened its meetings to elected village representatives. The northern farms became profitable after false fees disappeared. A small coal operation began under strict safety rules, with profits divided among debt repayment, tenant pensions, and the school trust. Ilara traveled to London to testify before a committee investigating fraudulent guardianship and concealed property agreements. Julian did not ask her to shorten the visit. He sent her copies of estate reports and one letter each week containing no demands. The first described a lamb born inside Mrs. Henshaw's pantry after escaping from the kitchen yard. The second complained that Thomas Reed had weaponized procedural rules against him. The third contained only a pressed blackthorn flower and the sentence, "The house remembers you accurately." Ilara returned after 3 months. Julian met her at the North Gate, the place where she had crossed into the storm after her banishment. He did not bring servants or a ceremonial carriage. He stood beside 2 horses and held the reins of the gentler mare. "Welcome home," he said. The words no longer meant he was granting her entry. They meant he recognized that home could not be given by one owner to another. They rode through the estate together. Children ran beside the lane. The Bell cottage had a new roof. The northern fields were green. At the terrace, the estate council waited beneath the pavilion for the annual accounts meeting. Julian dismounted, then offered his hand. Ilara accepted it. "I have a question," he said. "About the budget?" "No." "Then it should wait until after the meeting." "I have waited 3 months. You once made me wait 11 years to learn I owned half an estate." An argument difficult to defeat. He released her hand but remained beside her. "Will you walk with me this evening?" "Where?" "The map chamber." That sounds suspiciously symbolic. Thomas assisted. Symbolism was unavoidable. After the meeting, Ilara entered the map chamber and found the hidden drawer open. Her mother's deed rested beneath glass. Beside it lay a new legal document. Julian stood near the oak table. "What is this?" she asked. "A settlement. We already completed the ownership settlement. This concerns my half." Ilara read the first page. Julian had placed his portion of Blackthorn into a protected trust that could not be transferred through marriage, debt, or inheritance without the estate council's approval. If he married, his wife would not acquire Ilara's property. If Ilara married, her husband would not control hers. Neither owner could use marriage to absorb the other's share. "Why?" she asked. Because I intend to ask you something, and I do not want ownership anywhere near your answer." Her heart began to pound. Julian took a simple gold ring from his pocket, but did not kneel. "I will not offer you Blackthorn. It is already yours. I will not offer protection. You have protected yourself and half the county. I cannot promise never to make mistakes, because recent history would expose me as a liar." Ilara's eyes filled despite her attempt to remain composed. "What can you promise?" "To ask instead of command, to listen before judging, to make correction public when the harm was public, to respect every boundary you draw, even when it excludes me." He took one breath. "And to love you without confusing love with ownership." He held out the ring. "Ilara Fenwick, will you marry me?" She looked at the hidden drawer where the two keys remained side by side. Her mother had divided them so neither family could control the truth alone. For years, Ilara had believed belonging meant finding someone who could not cast her out. She understood now that true belonging began when no one possessed the authority to erase her. "On 4 conditions," she said. Julian's mouth curved. Mrs. Henshaw predicted 3. "Mrs. Henshaw is becoming careless. Name them. My property remains mine. Already guaranteed. My work remains mine. I would fear attempting to take it. We disagree openly, even when guests are present. Particularly when guests are present. And you never again tell me that I have no claim here." Julian's expression softened. "I will spend the rest of my life remembering that the claim was yours before I understood mine." Ilara held out her hand. "Then yes." He placed the ring on her finger. It was simple, warm, and entirely separate from every deed, estate, and title between them. Their wedding took place at the Northern Chapel in early autumn. Ilara wore ivory silk embroidered with small blackthorn flowers. The brass key hung at her throat beside her mother's silver compass, restored with a new needle. Julian waited without ducal robes or ceremonial jewels. Mrs. Henshaw cried loudly and denied it. Thomas Reed fell asleep during the bishop's remarks and awakened in time to object to an inaccurate reference to the trust. The tenants filled the chapel yard. Daniel Bell scattered flowers, most of which landed on Julian's shoes. After the vows, Ilara and Julian walked together to the north gate. A new stone marker had been placed beside it. On one side was the ducal crest. On the other, the half-thorn and star. Beneath both appeared a single inscription: "Blackthorn is held in trust for all who keep it alive." Years later, visitors continued telling the story incorrectly. They said a poor dependent had been banished, discovered she owned half an estate, and married the duke who had cast her out. The truth was less simple and more valuable. Ilara had not won because hidden wealth transformed her into someone worthy. She had always been worthy. The deed merely forced others to confront what rank had allowed them to ignore. Julian had not earned her love through one apology or one public gesture. He earned the possibility of it through years of listening, repairing, surrendering control, and accepting that remorse without change was only another form of self-indulgence. Blackthorn prospered, though not because coal was discovered or debts disappeared. It prospered because its owners stopped treating the estate as a possession and began treating it as a promise. Whenever disputes arose, Ilara placed the 2 old keys on the council table. One had belonged to her mother. The other had belonged to the dukes. Neither could open the hidden drawer alone. "That," she would say, "is the entire lesson." And when Julian occasionally became too certain of himself, she reminded him of the afternoon he had banished her from her own land. He never protested. He would look across the table at the woman he had once ordered into a storm and answer with the humility that had taken him so long to learn. "Yes, Your Grace." Alara would raise one eyebrow. "I am not a duchess in this meeting." "No," he would say, "you are the owner of the difficult half." "Which half is that?" "The half containing the truth." Then she would smile, the council would return to its work, and the old house would stand around them, no longer silent, no longer owned by pride, and remembering at last exactly to whom it belonged.